we're here to talk through the findings and recommendations from the joint research project Clinical Excellence Queensland did with the Queensland University of Technology, looking at the comms and engagement preferences for frontline clinical workers. My name is Katie May, for those who don't know me. I'm currently an account manager with the Strategic Communications branch within the department, but when we kickstarted this research project, I was working at Clinical Excellence Queensland in their comms team. So next slide, thanks Kate. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands which we're all meeting on today. For me in Brisbane, that's the Yagara and Turrbal people, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I also recognise and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and I thank them for their contribution to health, medicine and healing and communications and storytelling that we'll be talking about today. So here's a quick overview of today's agenda. I'll just provide a bit of a background as to the rationale for the project, our why we wanted to do this research. Then I'll hand over to the QUT project team who'll go through the overview, the findings and the key actions and recommendations. And then we'll hopefully have time for some Q&As towards the end before we hopefully finish up on time at 5 o'clock. So this is the research team. We've got Professor Rebecca Russell-Bennett, Professor Yvonne Miller, Dr. Kate Leatherin, Dr. Stephen White, Dr. Jackie McGraw, Dr. Ryan McAndrew, Ms. Taryn Casey, Ms. Zoe Engerman, and myself. Great team. So our why did we want to do this research project? Well, to begin with, we did have a bit of existing insights into communications for healthcare professionals, and that was based on a 2019 research project done by the Strategic Comms branch. And that looked at how different types of clinicians, so allied health, nursing, midwifery, medical specialists, how they like to engage with and use some of the existing channels we have at Queensland Health, like QEPs, newsletters, DG Connect and e-alerts and things like that. So we wanted to, I guess, take a deeper dive into that, looking at more other types of communication platforms and technology, social media, podcast, and not looking at the current state of the things that we can use within our workplace, but also looking at the future state. What are some of the things we should be working towards and some of the technologies that we should be taking advantage of to improve the user experience when you're managing and dealing with communications and engagement. And also the COVID-19 pandemic, it taught us a lot of things, and it taught us and reinforced that it's really hard to communicate effectively with people working on the front line, particularly from a system and whole of department perspective. You might have received the COVID-19 advice frontline updates that were done between our comms team, the Queensland Clinical Senate and the Queensland Clinical Networks Executive. It was attempting to fill that gap in terms of providing timely information throughout the crisis. That's now kind of evolved to become a frontline advice update with general clinical updates and news and items of interest. But again, we were relying on email, and that's often our default. It's our fallback way of communicating, which is fine a lot of the time, but we also talk a lot about email fatigue and feeling overwhelmed. And from a frontline worker's perspective, that makes total sense. You've got emails from your manager, director, your executive from the hospital, a hospital newsletter, your HHS, your board chair, your CE, then the department as well, trying to get stuff in front of you. So the sheer volume is quite overwhelming. And we wanted to identify how we could make it easier to find information that you want to find and things that you want to learn, whilst also making it easy not to miss the really important things. Because in amongst all of those communications, there are some important things that help you perform your role, become a well-rounded clinician, your well-being, learning and development opportunities, all of that stuff. So that was sort of the aim of the project. Because I've been around in health for a long time. It's actually 15 years, and I've worked in a lot of different roles, and I feel like we've been doing a lot of the same things: posters, screensavers, QEPs, a HHS newsletter article, and we just didn't have the reassurance that those things were effective and that they resonated with you as frontline clinical workers. So we really wanted to contribute to that evidence base to see what else we could find out to improve the way we engage and communicate across the system. And luckily, and I'm very grateful for the Bridge Labs program at CEQ, Satyan Chari and Anna Wesselman were integral in bringing this whole project to life. So thank you so much for your help in getting it off the ground. And obviously all the people who participated in the research, whether you were at our face-to-face workshops in Brisbane, Cairns, Rockhampton or Gympie, whether you did the online survey, obviously your inputs and your insights and your advice for us, without them, we wouldn't be here taking the next steps and finding out how we can make good change around Queensland Health. So thank you to everyone for your contributions. And I'll now pass over to Kate from QUT.
Thank you, Katie. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of a brief project overview. I won't spend long here because I know what we're all really interested in is hearing about the findings and insights. So let's get to it. So as Katie's already said, the project was a multi-stage project working with Queensland Health, CEQ and Bridge Labs. And we started off with a desktop review to try and establish a little bit of best practice and what was currently happening. We then followed up with co-design workshops and a survey with 31 people coming to our face-to-face workshops and another 400 doing the online survey. So again, reiterating what Katie's already said, thank you so much for being a part of that. And we finished up with reporting and sharing the insights, which is part of what we are doing now. A little bit of background on the approach that we took to communications in this project. So we very much were moving away from that traditional transmission model where a source sends a message through a channel and then it's received, to a more constructivist approach where it was about co-creating meaning and having a shared sense of communication and being able to co-create together. In terms of what we meant by communication engagement, it was really broad. When we went and spoke to people, it could have been about reading emails, it could have been about interacting with posts or sharing information or adding your thoughts or searching out information or reading posters, like all of these types of things. And we gave some specific examples as well to help guide those discussions. So as promised, brief. Now let's start talking about the project findings. So a lot of the project findings we're about to share with you are centered around this idea of the persona. So a persona is something that we use a lot in our research and in the marketing communication space. And these are essentially our main characters that illustrate the needs, goals, thoughts, feelings, opinions, expectations, and pain points of the various users or people that we're interacting with. So rather than representing, just one person, these personas allow us to build a profile of groups of people who share similar things. So essentially a persona brings a segment or a group of people to life, and then it makes it much easier to be able to communicate with them and to design things that are going to resonate. So this is just an example persona from a previous project that was looking at maritime safety. So you can see what I mean. We can build a profile where we explain the type of person this is, what they like, what they don't like, and what we need to provide to help support them. So in this project, after finishing the desktop review and some of our initial investigations, we found that the ideal framework for communications was around the idea of customer value. So we used the Holbrook customer value framework that you can see on the left, which breaks us into 4 different types of personas: economic, the functional, the emotive, the social, and the selfless persona. So for Queensland Health, this turned into the 4 that you can see on the right side of the screen: the efficient emu, the social squirrel, the chill cockatoo, and the selfless silkworm. Now, the reason that we tend to use these zoomorphized animal type personas is that it makes it so much easier to relate to than if we were to provide human faces, which is where we started out many years ago, where you provide a human face and people would say, oh, but I'm older than that person, I identify as a different gender, or I identify as a different ethnicity. So this allows us to make the personas much more inclusive and easier to see ourselves in. So we'll go through each one of these, and another important aspect of the persona is the journey that they go through as part of engaging with communications on their day-to-day work lives. So this is just an example persona journey map. This is for a court appointment reminder. So it's all about looking at what are the different user actions that people go through, what are the barriers that get in the way, what are the motivators that help, and how are they feeling? Because if we can look at, for example, on this one, we can see the kind of sad face down here, the negative emotion. This is happening when they're receiving a text reminder and they're feeling quite embarrassed. It is making the appointment salient, but they're not having a good emotional experience. So if we were to be looking at court appointments, we would look at that point and say, okay, well, how can we make that a little bit better? How can we improve the journey there? So for all of our personas, we created not only the current customer journey, but also an ideal version of the customer journey so that we could see where those tweaks were that needed to happen. So the personas, our efficient emu is our functional persona. So they very much focus on function and efficiency and getting their job done as well as they can and as efficiently as they can. We can see the different levels that they come through on these traits down here, more focused on self-benefit, moderate on the rules, externally motivated, quite expert, able to engage, doesn't particularly like taking orders, likes to do things their own way. They're bringing that experience, they're bringing that time that they've spent. With the kind of catchphrase of the efficient emu being, you know, what's in it for me? How does engaging with this communication help me to do my job faster and more efficiently and do a better job for the people who are around me? So they very much like communications that are clear, authentic, and credible, task-oriented, and they value time as currency. So they're all about ways to maximize their time. They are looking for ways to engage more efficiently, and they value communications that give them evidence-based rationale and benefits for why they're important and what the benefits are. And they like to focus on meeting targets, goals, and rewards. So as we go through this, you might see yourself in one or two of these personas. And this was indeed a very popular persona when we did the survey. So the current work journey of the efficient emu, looking at current versus ideal. Now, granted, we had to, in order to bring all of these personas together and compare them, we had to be quite broad with the different tasks. So if we imagine that on a typical day, it might start with getting organized, and then might have a team huddle or a team meeting, then might be seeing patients, and then having an end of day handover. They all follow that kind of same pattern. So the efficient emu currently starts the day kind of overwhelmed. There's a lot of emails coming through. They're not sure which ones are most important, which ones they need to attend to first. They're then quite happy when they head into their team huddle. They like face-to-face communications. They like to feel that they're getting things done. They then see patients, which is great. They really like being patient-focused. They like those face-to-face interactions again. And then at the end of day handover, while they're still enjoying that sense of communication, they are frustrated when things become one way and it's too heavily focused on paperwork. So in terms of the tweaks that might improve that for the efficient emu, one of our recommendations that we'll talk about a little more further on in the session is a dashboard that enables filtering of communications by relevance, because then they can start their day by saying, well, what do I need to know about right now in order to get my job done? And this helps them feel prepared and ready to take on the day. And then whenever we have these opportunities for interaction with two-way communications, that's something that we should really lean into for the efficient emu. Our social squirrel, prioritizes a sense of connection, and they really value being a team player. So our social squirrel, their motto is always in the loop. They like to connect with their community. They value information as currency, as in they like to be able to collect and then share the information. So you can see the connection with, you know, kind of squirrels and collecting acorns and sharing amongst the group. They engage with any communications that help them build social connections, but they don't like communications that are out of date or too formal and don't help to connect them to others. So for them, we're looking at how to make engaging a source of fun and connection. They like up-to-date social media, providing colorful imagery, and they like to leverage their social skills through becoming an influencer and passing on that information. So the current journey is, again, that they start with getting organized, but they don't like the one-way sense of the communication. It takes away a chance for them to interact and to gain that social value. They really like interacting with their teams. They like interacting with patients, not so much keen on paperwork. And at the end of the day handover, they like the interaction, but again, dislikes that form of paperwork that comes through. So for them, they are happier if they are given opportunities for communication to be two-way and to respond, and maybe to make some of the communications a little less formal where possible. The chilled cockatoo is our next persona. They are our emotive persona, which means they're all about feeling good. They like positive emotions. They like to avoid negative emotions. They don't like being really stressed out. I mean, who amongst us would put their hand up to say they like being really stressed out? So they're all about, you know, look good, feel good, have a good experience at work. They like communications to be relevant and labeled. So low cognitive effort, they are really focused on doing their best job, seeing their patients, seeing their colleagues. So they don't like to be spending all of their mental effort on trying to decipher emails and communications and what's relevant. They like comms that help to reduce their stress or gives them a sense of inspiration and a boost. They also like being given a chance to shine. They tend to avoid any communication that appears stressful or overwhelming or emotionally challenging. So for them, it's about making engagement stress-free. They like visual, filterable, two-way communications that also enable their voice to be heard. So we can see, even though the personas are different, there are a lot of commonalities starting to emerge around wanting to be heard, wanting to interact, valuing their patients and colleagues, and that dreaded start and end of the day. So their current and ideal workday journey, again, they tend to be quite overwhelmed by the volume of emails that happens, particularly when they're arriving outside hours and then they walk into their job, and that's what they have to deal with first up. Again, they're anxious about the end of day handover and wanting to have those clear boundaries. They like engaging with their team and their patients, but they don't particularly like lots of admin and paperwork, which can be quite overwhelming. For them, they need time allocated to engage with communications, so that they're not having to try and squeeze it in amongst their already very busy workday. They like things to be well structured, personal, and to have uninterrupted time for paperwork so they can leave on time and leave work at work. Lucky last, our selfless silkworm persona prioritizes making a positive difference. This is our most altruistic persona. They are focused on saving the world one person at a time, and they see a lot of meaning in what they do every day. So they like communications that are connected to their purpose and their values, and they value things that are inclusive, diverse, and respectful. They like communications that put people ahead of processes and show a sense of concern about well-being and so on. They do not like communications that they think are inappropriate or really overly corporate. So for them, it's about how do we engage to be good. They like things like good news stories that demonstrate the impact of engaging with comms, and they like to connect to their bigger purpose. And part of that is because if we look at the journey for our selfless silkworm, we can see that they are, kind of really exhausted because they have that deep connection to their work. They find it hard to really clock off. So they want to know what's important right now so that I can take action to do my best job. But they also need someone to be looking out for them to help them clock off and to help them see what's important right now. And without further ado, I will hand to my colleague Yvonne to talk through the rest of this findings section.
Thanks, Kate. I always love those personas. They're the favourite one. You might have guessed who you were. I think I'm efficient emu, and that hashtag WIFM, what's in it for me, really important. But we also did a survey. We asked everybody, what do they engage with? And I think this is really, really critical. That it's quips and the e-alerts were very much, the most. The most used, the most accessed, and then of course Microsoft Teams and a local level information. The DGTV was reasonably popular too, primarily in the urban setting, and they used it to find out what was going on essentially. So communication, we wanted to know what was happening, was it relevant for me in terms of training and development opportunities, and new guidelines and policies. So that kind of knowing how to do your job and do your job well is really what was most important. Next. Who do they share this information with? Probably no surprise here. You share it with your and who shares information with you? It's your close colleagues. So that is who close is best. So these are the things that are shared. It's shared locally, and clinicians also engage with the professional bodies, the associations, unions, and with their peers. That was probably the dominant source of information, is just local people that you work with. Next. I love this activity where we ask people to sort of talk about, what are the beacons, that are the things that are really working well, that are the highlights in this situation. It really is team meetings and team handovers. So the morning start to the day where you get that brief update from whoever's in charge. Also patient-focused, really clear. Digital communication was enjoyed. So there's a lot of conversation about the value of social media, podcasts and websites and app and online appointment bookings, that where they can be, timely and updated and efficient. There were a few myths. The myth was that that the systems don't work, or that all systems do work. There's a myth about that all staff are able to access emails regularly. And this came out a lot, that actually you can't access email when you're on the road very easily at all. And so that was a real challenge. Number of fears about cybersecurity, about missing something that was really critical. There's a bit of worry about that. And then also who forwards multiple CCs and who forwards an email. Sometimes it can be multiple forwarded from different people. So just that worry about missing something, and then who's in charge of it. And the taboo is what you can't really talk about. You can't critique things. Obviously, you can't say anything about work-related issues, of course, confidentiality. What we really found was there was a big difference between the regions and the urban settings, and that the regions were really focused on local news, and there was a sense of feeling disconnected from what was happening in Brisbane. And I think that's really important to keep in mind. Next. So what, helps or hinders engagement with communication? What motivates it is has to be relevant. It's got to be informative. It's got to be of value. It's got to be specific. The barriers are when it's irrelevant, when there's too many communications, and when people are on the go, the time poor. It needs to be clear so they can engage with it quickly. Next. So where to from here? How do people prefer to be talked to? Optimally, it's local communications delivered on desktop and mobile. They really wanted that ease and speed, email, digital materials, face-to-face meetings, social media, MyHHS, and local information, and also the Queensland Clinical Networks and CEQ were trusted sources of information, and they really there was a lot of trust placed in the local HHS newsletters and e-alerts and QEPs. Next. Oh, over to Rebecca. I forgot I did know that too. Sorry, Rebecca.
That's okay. Great. Okay. So I'm going to start pulling it together before, we get into watch the final steps. So next slide, Kate. Okay. So there were 6 key insights that we drew across the workshop and the survey. So the first key insight is that any future communications need to start with the communication design principles. And so the design principles were basically that communications need to be easy and intuitive to engage with, and they need to offer value. And I guess the key thing here is that this value proposition really depends on the persona. And as Yvonne pointed out, it also depends on where people live and the nature of their job. So we spoke to a number of clinicians who are out on the road, who are engaging directly with clients. And so they're not on their email. And that's really quite a different way of interacting to people who are at a desk and have that easy access to their computer. Timing, and I'm going to speak about that in the moment, and a way of engaging that allows two-way communication or the ability to connect with peers. And so the ability for other people to curate information and share that or to suggest information and to be in control of the information is also really important, rather than having a one-way push approach with communication where everything comes out to them rather than them being able to initiate or participate in the generation of communication. What was very clear was the need for a personalised approach to engage personas. The most popular idea was a dashboard. I'm going to show you a mock-up of that. And so the ability for the individual to be able to tailor how they receive the information, what they receive, when they receive the information that suits their job, that suits the way they want to communicate, was really important. You need to design for the personas that you cannot see. So there are personas that are more obvious than others. So the efficient emu, I think, is an easy one that people can understand. But the altruistic persona, the one that wants to receive information that helps reaffirm that they're doing a job for the reason that helps others, you don't necessarily see that person. And so how do you then design for that persona? We do have a little tip for how to do that in a moment. Timing was really important. What we noticed, the ability to control how your day starts and how your day ends is really important to clinicians. And so being able to identify the pain points in the communication journey in a day, in a week, in a month is really important with how the communications need to be, engaged with. There are nudges that you can use to make communications more engaging, and Steve is going to share a few of those. And the important thing is that communication is part of an overall system. So when designing up any kind of communication strategy or any kind of communication interface, an understanding of how that communication system needs to fit in with other systems within the system of a person's daily life, whether it be just their job or whether it's also their personal life. Understanding where communication fits in relation to everything else that a person does is a way of then identifying how to strategically leverage points, but also how to avoid creating additional pain points for the clinician so that you're not then creating additional burdens. Next slide. And I noticed in the chat there was a comment about breaking down the data depending on different groups. No, we haven't broken it down according to all of those different groups. That could be done, but that wasn't part of the scope of this project. Okay, so then looking at the different personas that we've got. So in the survey, we were able to identify people who aligned with each of the different personas. And I guess the caveat and the caution here is that this is, there was 400 responses to this survey, which was fantastic, but that's not the entire population of clinicians in Queensland Health. And so these percentages only represent the proportion of people in the survey who responded, and there can be a whole bunch of reasons why we've got the percentages that we have. But in the sample that we have, almost or just over 4 out of 5 people were the efficient EMU. And so the value proposition for the efficient EMU is about engaging with Queensland Health communication to allow them to do their job as efficiently as possible. And the communication tools that they most saw was a local newsletter, e-alerts and QHEPs, and their most preferred communication scenario that we gave them was a dashboard that they could personalise, that had metrics that allowed them to search out what they needed. I'm not going to talk about the bias there because Steve's going to do that in a moment. Our social score was 3.3% of the sample. And so the value proposition here was about being up to speed and knowing what's going on, being on the same page as colleagues. And so like the efficient EMU, they also wanted the local newsletter and e-alerts and QHEPs, but they wanted them, there was a different priority order. And they had a different preference for how they wanted to engage. And so they wanted some sort of sorting process within the inbox that was allowed them to go in. Maybe it's rated by their colleagues. Maybe they can rate and review and go, yep, that's a really good one for my team. And so when their team member goes in, they then get their the top rated by their team pieces of information. And that way they're alerted to what's going on. Maybe it's a separate folder in their inbox. Next slide, Kate. The chill cockatoo. So this one's all about just minimizing stress, being calm, and being prepared for work. It's about feeling in control and not being too stressed. And so like the other 2 personas, e-alerts, QHEPs and local newsletter, but again, very different order. The highest priority communication tool was the e-alerts. And like the efficient EMU, they also wanted a dashboard. The selfless silkworm had different communication tools. They wanted some sort of special broadcast because for them, they're wanting the communications to help them demonstrate that they're making a positive difference. So for them, they're wanting communication to help reaffirm the role that they're playing in helping the community. They also wanted a sorting process rather than the dashboard. Next slide, Kate. And over to Steve to tell us a little about the biases that were found.
Hey everybody, I'm Steve. I'm a behavioural economist. Let's start a little more at the beginning with bias. Excuse me. Bias is really, it's a bit of a loaded word in the common tongue, but from an applied psychology or behavioural economics perspective, it's really just easiest to think about bias as a different way of thinking. A lot of policy, whether those communication strategies for this example is designed for a one-size-fits-all, but a lot of policy needs to be tailored, particularly to different ways in which people process information or, think about problems when they approach them. Human beings make 30 or 40,000 decisions every day. So it's not surprising that people make, shortcuts or heuristics or biases creep into their decisions and their choice. So what we tried to do with some of the personas here is look at some of the cognitive differences that exhibit for different groups. if we can, or I realize there's a barrage of information that the audience is getting right now. I know, and this is something, definitely to absorb later, but yeah, it's interesting to look at the way that the personas are structured in relation to the way that the intervention, the making communication more engaging for particular people, and the way that you're going to design that in the future. We could go to the next slide. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So here are some of the more prevalent for each. What Rebecca and Kate are going to talk to in a second is really how to design nudges to help people make more informed choices or process information more easily. And this is the EAST framework set up by the BIT team under the former Cameron administration in the UK. And what we can do is sort of assist people when they come to this sort of cognitive opportunity to process information. We can help them to make the decision for them either easy, attractive, more social, or more timely. And if we're able to group people together, or group policies and initiatives and strategies together, what we can do is we can maximize outcomes tailored to more specific ways of understanding or behavior. That's me.
Right. Okay. So the future scenario, communication scenarios can be done either at a group level, or if you can take a more sophisticated approach, designing up very specific communication tactics for each persona. And so one of the ways that we've recommended to do that is through communication nudges based on the biases that we've seen coming through. And so the biases that were most prevalent was conjunction fallacy, loss aversion, and illusion of control. And so there's a whole bunch of nudges that you can do based on those particular biases to help people navigate the communication journey and just make it easier in general at work for people to receive information. So we asked people in the survey what kind of communication scenario they were interested in. Those communication scenarios came out of the workshops. So in the workshops, we gave people a lot of free thinking to say, what can we do? Really think big. And from that, there was the items down the column there, and then we went into the survey and said, well, which of these, would you most like? And you can see that the top vote there, almost half of the sample were keen on a dashboard. And so there's a framework called the PIP framework, whether a tool is passive, interactive, or proactive with people. And we will classify a dashboard as being interactive, where you can personalize it, but it doesn't take over from you. So what was interesting is that a proactive approach, where maybe you've got an AI concierge who goes and seeks things for you and then kind of does it for you, was not quite as interesting to people as something that they had a little more control over. And so the digital approach was seen very much as where things should be heading in the future. So there was interest in some of the face-to-face, it seemed to be much more around the digital. And you can see on the right, there were some additional ideas from survey participants, including short podcasts, the ability to update or upvote relevant information. And so this will vary by region, by group, by job occupation, and by whether or not you're in or out of the office and the nature of your job. And I can see there's a question, Steve, I'm going to throw back to you in a moment. Someone has asked, what is conjunction fallacy? So I'll leave you to think about that while I do the dashboard. Next slide. Okay, so what we did was we got our visual designer to do a bit of a mock-up of the dashboard, given that this came through very strongly, both at the group level and for two of the four personas, and that covered almost 90% of the sample. So we did this up. And so basically, a dashboard needs to incorporate the ability to be personalized and flexible, filtering of information. So one of the things that you could do to make it very personalized is to have a persona quiz. And so you'd go in, you do this little quiz. And so if you were the efficient emu, there would be a version of the dashboard that knows that you're after efficiency. And you could have a whole bunch of communication nudges designed up for that efficient emu that operates in a way that we know works for that particular type of person. You could overlay that with where you work. So you could actually have personas that also reflect where you are, in whether you're regional or metro. Maybe you're more at your desk, and maybe you're more out. So you could use all of that information through the quiz in order to personalize that dashboard as much as possible to make it easy for the individual based on what we know about the personas and through this research. So a dashboard is a way of making people feel in control. It allows them to manage their own day, and they're far more likely to engage with communication if they've got a say in it and they've got a way of controlling what they're seeing. And this is really where nudges really are very, very useful, because the nudges makes it easy to access. It makes it attractive for people. It allows or draws on social norms, and most importantly, it allows the timing. And we know that getting the alerts and receiving information at the right time of day for people is really critical. Information overload just means people bail out and don't really pay a great deal of attention because it's all just too overwhelming. So I'm going to throw to Steve, if you're still there, to explain what is conjunction fallacy in terms of communication.
Still here. So conjunction fallacy, it's a really interesting one. It's the conjoining of probabilities in relation to a decision or an outcome. But let me give you a practical example. So my son is a huge Brisbane Broncos fan, and I can't remember the name of the player, but he said, oh, on the weekend, such and such player went to the school that I went to, and he's a great player. He must be a fantastic bloke. Now, there's two outcomes there. What he's talking about is one, the individual, he's sourcing information from, a relationship he had with his school. And then he's also talking about the player being a great player. And then the outcome is really, he's saying that this person must be a great person. Well, there's two probabilities there. One is he went to the school that he went to, and the other that he's a Brisbane Broncos player. If I think about the mathematical formula for adding two probabilities together, which is whenever I multiply two decimals together, I must end up with a smaller number. So adding extra things to, justify your decision-making process is this conjoining. And the fallacy comes into it in that just because I add more information or I justify my decision with more process or more data doesn't necessarily mean that it's more probable. And in this context, I think probably a good example is relationships that you have probably with other horizontal or vertical staff. If you hear a lot of people suggesting that this is a good outcome, or this is the strategy, or this is that conjoining that information together doesn't necessarily increase the probability that it is the right outcome or the outcome that should be taken by the group. Clear as mud, Rebecca, or?
It's basically really taking that and linking it to the communication.
Absolutely. There's a battery of these bias, and they're all, illusion of control is another one that pops up a lot looking at these personas. Illusion of control is where you think that you are in control of outcomes in your environment that aren't necessarily under your control. One is, I'm not going to water the plants this afternoon in my garden because I'm pretty sure it's going to rain. I'd love to be omnipotent, but, I don't have control of the weather. So often we make these sort of, decisions or these statements, in the illusion of control sense as well, that are completely unrelated to either the choice or the outcome. The document has, and we could definitely send through a list of definitions for all of these bias as well. So, please don't, we can add all of this information in, definitely. Kate's nodding away. So
So with conjunction fallacy, it could be that people receive two pieces of information and put them together and it forms something bigger than what it actually is. And so one of the challenges with getting lots of information coming through is that people are sort of mentally adding up, well, if the DG says this and then so-and-so says this and then this is going on, and they put it all together and they go, oh my gosh, Queensland Health must be closing down, and it's just not the way it is. So because that's very prevalent in this group and there's so much information coming in, the the likelihood of people combining information and coming up with a completely wrong conclusion is actually quite high. So being able to filter through that and sort of address that bias becomes quite important when you've got just so much communication coming through. Okay, next slide, because I know that we're on a time limit. Okay, so a systems approach means really breaking things down and understanding that there's a mindset shift that we need. And so with communication, it's not, we need to move from a one-way approach to a collaborative two-way communications, understanding communication sits within a broader system. Every system has goals. Every system has rules, every system has information flows and feedback loops. And so when you take a systems approach to designing up communication, you take all of that into account. You say, well, what are the rules? When is communication supposed to arrive? Whose communication is the most important? What are those tacit rules? And so Yvonne touched on some of those around the taboos and the fears and the rules that people have about communication. And we need to take that into account with designing a new form of communication. And what we're looking for here is the optimal structure for communication flows and overcoming some of those system barriers that we can't change and we have to sort of work around. And so you can see some of the verbatim comments on the right-hand side from some of the clinicians in the workshops that indicate that there are some systems problems that we need to navigate through. Next slide, Kate. And I think I'm handing over now to Katie May.
Yes, thank you, Rebecca. And thank you to you all for those updates and walking us through the research. Sorry, my greyhound is nudging me. She must be hungry. So yeah, in terms of next steps, I'm not sure how many people are aware, but the department has been going through a business case for change, which is essentially like a restructure. And under that restructure, all of the media and comms teams within the department have been brought together centrally into the strategic communications branch. And in terms of that integration process, most of us have relocated where we need to into one office, but the operationalization of that in terms of how we work, what platforms we're going to use, what is our full service offering, that's all still being worked through. I have listed the services of the branch at the moment, but realistically, the integration process and establishing new ways of working and the findings of this research actually create like a never before seen opportunity, in my opinion, to really redefine how we think about comms, how we will deliver comms, at least from the department's perspective. But realistically, the branch is only one sort of cog in the wheel when it comes to communications going on around the system. So that's why we really wanted to share this research really broadly across Queensland Health, so that all of us can look at how we communicate within the workplace and ideally make changes in a way that's more considerate of the end user, perhaps looking at what persona we think they might be, and taking on board some of those nudging techniques and things like that. But we are exploring other platforms. There is a Microsoft product that's very similar to the dashboard idea. So yeah, it's there's no silver bullet at this stage, and I think it's clinician comms and engagement is one of those things that is very difficult and something we're just going to have to refine over time. But as was the aim in terms of having a better evidence base to work towards improving the way we do things, we've certainly got that here with this information.